Hi, everyone. Welcome to the SHERA program overview training session. Thank you for joining. We know you're all very busy, so we appreciate you making time today. We're going to wait a couple minutes for everyone to filter in, and then we'll get started shortly. Just a couple housekeeping items. Everyone is on mute during this presentation. At any point, if you do have a question, you can use the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we will either answer your question live in the Q&A, or we will hold until we pause for questions. If we don't get to your question during this session, we will be sure to follow up. We also will be having a SHERA FAQ document that will be updated on the regular with all of your questions that are asked during this session. This session is also going to be recorded. The recording will be posted. If you do not consent to being recorded, please reach out and we'll figure out how to get this content and materials to you in another way. This is confirming that this recording has now started, and we're going to kick off this training session now. Over to you, Ben.
Hi, so just to briefly, thanks everybody for joining to learn about this new program. So I'd just like to quickly introduce the panelists. There's myself, Ben Stone, Director of the Division of Public Housing at DHCD. Chris DeVore, who most of you know, is Associate Director for the Bureau of Housing Management at DHCD, and McQueen Clerger, who's a new addition to the team. Her title is Eviction Diversion Subsidized Housing Coordinator. She's helping us spearhead these new programs, and she'll be doing the first part of the training. Additionally, we have training support from Accenture, who've helped us on the program, and CyberSense will be helping us train the housing authorities on how to apply through this program. And now over to McQueen.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure being with you guys today. Today, we are going to start by reviewing our training goals and objectives. Then we will go into SHERA program overview and the property owner's journey through the SHERA program. Next, we will talk about who is eligible for the SHERA and what documentation is required. And finally, we will end with some time for questions and review next steps. Next slide. Today's training is going to review the Subsidized Housing Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or SHERA, and provide you with an understanding of the new program and policies. Our goal is to provide better support to housing authorities and tenants that are eligible for SHERA as they apply for assistance. Before we get started, we want to hear from you to better understand your role and get a sense of who is joining us today. We're going to use a tool called Menti Mentor to help us with a quick live poll. To participate, go to menti.com on your smartphone or computer browser, enter the code 56863224 into the field shown to the right. We will pivot to Menti to collect this feedback. Once results are coming in, react to the poll. I see we have a lot of managers today. Logistics teams to post this links and code into the chat for participants to easily join the poll, presenters to switch to the Menti after 30 seconds. SHERA is next slide.
McQueen, we're going to just pause a second to actually get the results in.
Okay, sounds good.
And we'll post that in the chat as well for folks. And you can join either through your smartphone or through your browser that you're participating in this presentation with. So this is great. We're getting a lot of great results here. It's really helpful just to kind of understand who we have during this session. So thank you so much for those who are participating. All right, McQueen, you want to
Sure.
jump back in?
Yes, sorry. Okay. So SHERA is a federally funded emergency housing assistance program for renters impacted by COVID-19. SHERA will help residents of public and affordable housing clear rental arrears that are from April 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. Qualified owners of rent-restricted properties will be able to apply for assistance with rent arrears on the accounts of all of their eligible tenants. The SHERA program is designed to be a collaboration between the state of Massachusetts and qualifying owners of housing with income-based rental subsidies on behalf of their tenants. Eligible property owners will apply for assistance on behalf of their tenants with rent arrears from April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. Owners are able to use a streamlined online process to apply on behalf of multiple residents in a single application, so you can manage everything centrally. SHERA takes advantage of the compliance work already done by owners of subsidized housing, reducing administrative duplication. By applying for SHERA assistance, owners continue their pledge to not evict tenants for non-payment of rent. This also relieves the burden of regional administrating agencies, RAAs, and the RAP Center administrating the state's other emergency rental assistance programs, ERAP and RAFT, since tenants will not need to apply individually for assistance. Owners are encouraged to refer their tenants to the RAAs for other benefits, such as utilities and moving expenses, if they decide to relocate. SHERA funds will be administered through a contract with Mass Housing and Massachusetts Housing Partnership. To roll out the SHERA program, there was a soft launch or pilot of the SHERA program. Pilot members applied through the system. Volunteer owners working group composed of private and public owners with diversity of geographic and property types. This has allowed us to learn firsthand how the program will work before opening up the program. We have collected feedback and best practices from the pilot that we will be sharing to support you through the participation in SHERA. We will open the application to other groups in 3 phases. First, Mass Housing and MHP portfolio of properties. Second, Housing Authority portfolio and DHC subsidy portfolio will be happening around end of May or early June. Finally, 40B and 40R properties not included in the 2 previous groups. And lastly, our SHERA journey. This slide outlines the process for owners to apply for and receive SHERA assistance. First, owners have received communications about the SHERA program and access to program materials. Next, owners will be invited to register for SHERA through the SHERA online portal and attend a program outreach and owner awareness session. This is what you are attending today. There will be additional training opportunities throughout this process. LHA can start communicating with tenants before registration opens. We have found that it takes a couple weeks to gather tenant certifications. We will publish final LHA specific docs that can be shared with tenants by the end of week. 2/3 can happen before or during one. We will announce date when registration and applications open to public and LAH shortly. Again, we are targeting late May or early June for phase 2. SHERA applications will be reviewed and approvals will be communicated to property owners who have responsibilities of informing the residents. Denials will be communicated to the owner and the tenant by DHCD. Now that you have an overview, I'm now going to hand off the colleague to Ben to walk you through some of the SHERA program details.
I think Chris is going to take this section.
Yep, that's right. Chris, if you want to kind of dive in here, mic is all yours.
Thank you everyone for joining us. So I'm going to talk about the owner eligibility. Next. So there are three conditions that have to be satisfied, or in these slides also apply to not just the housing authorities, but other entities that are eligible. So for the first criteria for owners is that you must meet the threshold eligibility, and all housing authorities are eligible. That's number 2 here. To meet this criteria, the owner must satisfy one of the three conditions that's up on the screen. So for others, the owner has an existing borrower relationship with Mass Housing or Massachusetts Housing Partnership, and their sponsors in good standing with Mass Housing and Mass Housing Partnership. Again, housing authorities are eligible. Or there is a sponsor has at least one property subject to use restrictions due to participation in a state and federal program that has 20 or more rental housing units. So again, housing authorities are eligible. Next slide, please. These criteria do not have to be met by housing authorities. You are exempt from this, but if you were one of the other owners that was listed above, the criteria 2 requires that the owners or sponsors be in good standing. A sponsor would be considered in good standing of none of the properties in its portfolio have loans with Mass Housing or Mass Housing Partnership or DHCD in active default. Sponsors with properties in forbearance are still considered to be in good standing. And criteria 3 is compliance experience, which does not apply to housing authorities, but to other owners, that their designated representative must have 3 years compliance experience and at least one staff member holding certification and compliance training recognized by the affordable housing industry. The fourth criteria for eligibility is signing the owner agreement. And the owner agreement outlines responsibilities and commitments of the owner. These commitments are listed on here and on the next 2 slides, and I will walk you through those in detail. Many of these commitments, engaging with residents, supporting applications to rental assistance, DHCD has urged housing authorities to do this throughout the pandemic, and you guys have risen to the challenge and have done excellent work. And so it's been around the pandemic as well as the the eviction diversion pledge. So you need to apply the benefit. You will apply the benefit to the tenant account within 30 days of receipt of assistance payments. You'll suspend evictions and not initiate new evictions for non-payment of rent against households that receive SHERA benefits for at least 6 months after the last assistance payment is applied to the tenant household account. We're going to ask that you reach out proactively to households who are behind in their rent, engage proactively with residents in arrearage to create payment plans, and promote program access to residents, support resident applications for rental assistance payments, and accept payments when they are made. For tenants whose rents aren't based on their household income, refrain from implementing rent increase on the households eligible for SHERA that might otherwise be permitted based on revised HUD income and rent figures until the later of July 31st, 2021, and when the applicable subsidy program permits the owner to implement the increases. Provide downward rent adjustments for income-based rents as applicable. And these are, these are interim rents or any rent recertifications that need to be done. Encourage structured and interactive landlord tenant mediation, including use of the state-funded no-cost community mediation program. Inform tenants when applications are submitted, when payments are received, and apply to their rent arrears. Instruct auditors to, we will be instructing auditors because for the AUP program to incorporate protocols into their 2021 audits for review of the SHERA funding applications and payments. This is a requirement of the program that it be audited. So we will work to incorporate a provision within the AUP. To continue with the owner obligations, if duplicate payments are made or received from SHERA funds, or there is something that is out of compliance, those funds will need to be repaid. We're asking that you obtain and retain required documentation on tenant eligibility in your files at the Housing Authority. Submit all required reports and requests that are requested online and through the owner portal. and certify with each submission that all information is correct and complete, and then that you're agreeing to be subject to compliance reviews. So those are all the obligations that have to be met and are outlined in the owner's agreement. And now Ben is going to go through the property and household eligibility.
Thank you, Chris. Next slide, please. Right, so this is like some of the other slides, there are some somewhat complicated eligibility criteria that do not apply to housing authorities. Housing authority owned and managed properties, federal public housing and state public housing, are eligible for SHERA. So these other two bullets, which I'll quickly read, apply more generally to all affordable housing. So eligible properties are income restricted affordable rental housing properties owned by eligible owners, which covers all housing authorities that receive state or federal subsidies for construction and or rehab of the income restricted housing, or currently receive project-based rental assistance under contracts administered by the Commonwealth or other state public or quasi-public agencies. And the eligible properties must be subject to an annual audit, and all public housing meets those criteria. One important note, though, because this could cause confusion, many public and local housing authorities administer vouchers, MRVP, AHVP, and or Section 8. So this is a property-based program. So unless the public or local housing authority manages the property through a project-based rental assistance, where these vouchers are used, the private landlord at that property should apply on behalf of those tenants. But this landlord will be able to rely on the existing income certifications already completed by the public local housing authority as part of managing those voucher programs. So that's just a clarification so that we don't have two different entities applying for the same tenant. Next slide, please. All right. So these are tenant eligibility guidelines that, just to be clear, were established by the Consolidated Appropriations Act passed in December 2020, which established this federal pot of emergency rental assistance. So these are federal guidelines, and there is not really any leeway here since they are established by federal law. So the eligible criteria are as follows. The rental arrears must be from rent that was not paid, that was due between April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. The household should have experienced a financial hardship due to COVID-19, but that is established by a tenant self-certification. The owner can demonstrate that the renter household has eligible rental arrearages. So hopefully that's back arrearages that you are tracking in your tenant management system. And the household has income at or below 80% of area median income. I should also note that eligibility is not affected by immigration status. So if a tenant is eligible for SHERA assistance, the property owner must collect the following required documentation and maintain it in the file in case of audit. Income certification documentation. And for housing authorities, that is the most recent income cert. We do know that a lot of housing authorities took advantages of waivers from DHCD or HUD to defer 2020 income certs. And if that's what you did, you can rely on the 2019 or otherwise most recent income certification. You will also need to hold this tenant certification. You can only apply if you have a signed tenant certification from the tenant, which attests that they've been impacted by COVID-19, that they have not applied for other duplicative assistance, and agrees on the amount that they owe to the housing authority for which the housing authority will be applying, and gives permission for the owner to apply on tenant behalf. So that's critical that you get these tenant certs from tenants, and this will probably be one of the biggest lifts for housing authorities as they get ready to apply. And that really should be, in most cases, signing the tenant cert should be the only action the tenant needs to take in order to apply for these funds. And finally, you'll have to, on the application, you'll have to enter the last 4 digits of the Social Security number. If the tenant has one, you do not need a Social Security number to be eligible. We're only requesting this to aid in deduplication efforts with other rental assistance. So we don't want that to dissuade people without a Social Security number from applying. And there's also certain demographic data on, I believe, gender and race that's required by the Treasury, by the federal Treasury, per the program. So in almost all cases, to certify income, a public local housing authority can just rely on the documentation already provided for the most recent certification, whether that happened, and that may have happened all the way back in 2019 if the housing authority took advantage of waivers. These following more detailed ways to provide substitute income certification would only be necessary if for some reason the housing authority did not have an income cert on file, but that is pretty much impossible since you need to have your income certified to enter public housing. But if that did come up, some of these alternate documents include a filed 2020 IRS form 1040 or 1040 EZ, covering each adult household member over 18, or documentation of benefits, benefit letter dated January 2020 or later, confirming any of the following benefits, including Veterans Chapter 115 benefits, Department of Transitional Assistance benefits, subsidized childcare benefits, mass health benefits, or finally, documentation of monthly income for 2 months prior to application, including unemployment benefit check, bank statements, 2 pay stubs, Social Security benefit letter, or other proof of income. However, all that said, just going back to what I said at the beginning of the slide, we are just requiring that the public local housing authority has a most recent income cert, and most recent could be as late as old as 2019 or possibly even 2018, depending on the cadence of your annual certifications and whether you took advantage of waivers. So in most cases, you will not have to provide these alternate ways of certifying income. You can rely on the work you've already done. Okay, next slide. Thank you. All right, so there is one bit of guidance. This is more tenant facing, but will be important for housing authorities. As you know, state public housing tenants are required to report an increase of 10% or more of household monthly income by the 7th day of the month following the month in which the increase occurred. That is from 760 CMR 6. And our understanding is that federal public housing authorities are allowed to create their own policies for reporting reporting income increases, but most of them have some sort of policy. It could be a percentage or dollar threshold. So for LHAs, at least on the state side, if a housing authority, if somebody does come in for a monthly to report an increase in monthly household income, the LHAs are supposed to conduct a rent determination and retroactively change the tenant's rent to the first day of the second month of the increase. We are really encouraging tenants to report any increase in income that has not been reported before the owner applies. This retroactive amount due may be eligible for rental assistance payments. The reason we're telling tenants to do this is that if the tenant does not report this income, that they have as unreported income increases, and the LHA finds out about the unreported income at an annual rent determination later in 2021, these rental assistance payments from SHERA may not be available, and the tenant may have a large arrearage on their rent account. That's obviously bad for the tenant, as they'll have difficulty paying it back, and it's bad for the housing authorities. They may not get the money. So what we are going to do is encourage tenants who have not reported income over the past year for whatever reason to report that income now, because if they report it now, they will have it added to their back rent, but then the housing authority can submit to SHERA for that back rent, get that money, and get it cleared off the tenant's account. And just increases in income could be a result of unemployment income, federal pandemic unemployment income, employment and increased work hours, additional benefits. There's obviously a variety of ways household income could increase. And just a reminder that per THCD guidance, for most of this period, at least since October, federal enhanced unemployment income is generally countable as income for purposes of rent determination. So again, to continue on, LHAs notify tenant households on their application that the application has been submitted, any request for additional documents. And I should have noted here that in general, everything we said earlier is sufficient, just basically the tenant cert and a spreadsheet application from the housing authority of their claims by each property. But in certain cases, generally, if the claim is very large, over $5,000 for a tenant, there there may be additional or if the person appears to be over income, there may be additional documentation requested of the housing authority in order to process the claim. And the LHAs also need to notify the tenant when the application has been approved and the payment to the tenant account. This payment notice must specify the dollar amount of rental arrearages for which application has been made, the amount of reimbursement that the owner has received, and the months for which the payments have been applied to the tenant account. Application denials will be provided by DHCD. Okay, administrative reviews. The LHAs who determine at the pre-application stage, so that's before submitting a claim, that a tenant is ineligible to apply for SHERA are expected to work with tenants who ask for a review of ineligibility determinations. You should notify the tenant immediately if you are not going to submit a claim on their behalf if they have signed a tenant cert. So the LHA must accept the tenant household's self-attestation of financial hardship due to COVID-19. You should not be able to deem a tenant ineligible because you don't believe that they've actually been impacted. You're supposed to rely on their signed tenant certification. So you really should be only notifying that they're ineligible for two reasons. One, they're over income, they're over 80% AMI, or they do not have back rent arrearages from the eligible period between April 1, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. So you must immediately notify the tenants of this by sending the notice. This notice will provide the tenant with the opportunity to ask the housing authority for an administrative review in writing within 15 calendar days. Once the housing authority receives this request, the authority must designate someone who did not make the initial determination to review all submitted documentation to determine whether the tenant is eligible for SHERA within 15 calendar days of receiving the request. And I just want to highlight that this is like an expedited review. You just need to have a different person than the original reviewer review this request. It is not a full, housing authority grievance panel. It is not that. And then, of course, the LHA must communicate the outcome. If the LHA determines that the tenant is eligible for SHERA, the LHA must submit an application on behalf of the tenant through the SHERA portal to notify the tenant of the application submission and to continue with the SHERA claim process. If the LHA confirms that the tenant is ineligible for SHERA, the LHA must notify the tenant of the decision and the redetermination notice. The LHA must include both a statement encouraging the tenant to notify the housing authority of any changed circumstances in the future, in case the tenant may then be eligible for SHERA, and a listing of available rental assistance resources, including the no-cost community mediation program. And now we'll pause for questions now before moving on to next steps. So I can answer one question I have in the chat here because I have in the Q&A that I imagine applies to a lot of people. This is from Housing Authority Director, who notes some tenants just stopped paying rent knowing there was an eviction moratorium. They may not have a financial hardship or change in income during this period. How can LHA show hardship then as required by the federal government? Are these units therefore not eligible? And then somebody asked, another person asked a similar question, how specific does this attestation need to be? It's a form, the tenant certification form. And so to answer these two questions one at a time, or combining them, in order to show hardship, there's two ways you show hardship. One, that they have back rent, which makes they can't apply. There's nothing to apply for if they don't have back rent, but the back rent also shows that they have had some hardship and are at risk of homelessness. And also you can rely on the tenant. You just rely on their self-certification. It's very broad. It can be because of income loss or enhanced expenses, but we're not asking LHAs. In fact, we're telling them not to question whether that signature is legit. You're supposed to rely on that tenant certification that they have been financially impacted by COVID in some way.
Hey, Ben, this is Claire. I'm just going to throw a little loop in here. Kaylee, if you want to go to the next slide for a second. We just have a quick, if you want to just quickly kind of, this is just a screenshot of it, but it kind of gives you a little flavor of what's actually included.
Right, so this asks for the basic information. And then I think the next slide will show, and this is the demographic information that's required by the US Treasury. And then if you go, then does the next slide have the actual
no, we just have the first page screenshot, but
well, there's basically a certification that where they're supposed to sign off that they have either lost income or had increased expenses due to COVID. Okay, so I see some other, should I keep going with the questions?
Let's see. I can jump in. Thanks, Ben. I know that we started to touch on what should be included in that, like what makes a self-attestation eligible. Did we cover that fully? Is that clear for everyone? That as long as a tenant completes that form and certifies that they were impacted by COVID, then we accept those self-attestations. I'm gonna move on to another question in the chat. It says, if an executive director at a small LHA is making the initial determination, who shall be the other staff member to make that redetermination?
Well, that's a good question. We hope we can work with very small housing authorities that do not have a second person to look at it. Maybe provide someone from another housing authority, or yes, we'll have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But that should be only for the very small ones, which we know exist, that have very few staff.
Thanks. The next question is, will DHCD provide financial support for the administrative burden associated with this program?
So thank you for that question. At this time, the plan is no, because while I'm not going to say there's no admin burden, there certainly is. We hope that this is a way for housing authorities to more quickly receive, more quickly and more comprehensively get their back payments, which we know are pretty extensive across the portfolio, paid. And that it will be more likely that since this is being handled on a property rather than individual basis, it should be easier than the overall ERAP individual program. But it's a fair question. There's certainly going to be work required of housing authorities in order to get this funding. And also, it's available to both to federal and state housing, and DHC cannot give operating subsidy from the state public housing to federal public housing either. But everybody is eligible to, both sides of the house are eligible to apply for this federal rental assistance.
Thank you, Ben. This next question is asking, a spreadsheet and tenant cert is required. Oops. What is the application for each tenant as noted a few minutes ago? Sorry for the cap letters. No worries. So this question is asking, what is the application for each tenant as noted? Do you want to take this one, Ben?
Sure. So, and Claire, Viva, or Chris, stop in when I'm describing this incorrectly, but I think we may have just been a little loose with language. When you submit a spreadsheet with a list of claims for a property, that is the application, really, with the information, and that we're relying on the tenant certs and income certs that you have on file. But what you are actually submitting for a claim will be a spreadsheet of claims for a given property. And that is the application.
Yep. So what you're saying, Ben, is that the spreadsheet is the full application made up of a number of tenant claims, correct?
That's right. You can upload a spreadsheet. It might have five, say for one property, maybe you have a 200 property where you have 10 claims. You should be able to submit a spreadsheet with 10 claims on it, and that constitutes the application for that property.
I think this next question kind of builds on that. It's asking who issues the payment. I think this would be a good time to go back to our owner journey. Kaylee, if you can go back to, I think it's slide 11. Ben, if you can walk us through the full process of registering, submitting that application, and then how the payment will be distributed.
Yes, so if I skip ahead to submit application, the payments, well, it's actually not really on here, but the answer is we're finalizing the payment structure, but it's likely going to be through a outside bank. Will then make pay after DHCD approves. It will be a bank we're contracting with will make the payment to the housing authority. Is the answer.
Hey, and Teacher, Ben, do you mind just, I think maybe revisiting this slide just to kind of clarify the steps would be helpful.
Oh, the whole thing? All right. So right now we are now making, over the last week or so, and then now with this training, we're making the policy announcement. Shortly, we hope to give you a date to register to the SHERA portal. As we said, that date will probably be in late May, early June. We're finalizing some things with the pilot and making sure everything is working smoothly before opening it up more widely. So then you can register with the SHERA portal with the tax ID and the signed owner agreement. And throughout, before one and after registering, there's going to be training available. And also before one, you can start the communicating with tenants to basically to start collecting these tenant certifications. And there's a question here of, is there a standard letter to send to tenants initially? The answer is yes, and that should be posted shortly. That we're just finalizing the LHA specific letter. But it should be posted on that SHERA portal within the next few working days, and we will certainly let all housing authorities know when that is up there. And that is a form letter you can send to your tenants. And then, so moving on, you got the application materials. When you're ready for a given property, you can then apply through the SHERA portal. I think it's basically a spreadsheet application by property. So when you pull information out of your systems, it's on a property basis, so that's a development basis. You know, for state public housing, your 66702 would have one spreadsheet, your 200-1 would have one spreadsheet. And following submitting the application, you let the tenant know you've applied on their behalf, and then if if the system denies their claim, we will communicate that to the tenant. But if it's approved, you're expected to let the tenant know that it's been approved and let them know that they can, that their back rent has been cleared by that amount.
Thank you, Ben. This next question is regarding tenants that have moved out. So if a tenant has vacated, but the LHA has an outstanding balance for that tenant, and they may qualify for the program, would the LHA still be able to apply on their behalf?
I can take that one. So basically, unfortunately, this will be clarified in FAQs, but no. And the reason is that our understanding of the federal guidelines is that it's meant to maintain tenancies, if the tenancies ended, and also this program's on a property basis. So if the person no longer has a tenancy at that property, they are not eligible to apply, or that owner is not eligible to apply on their behalf. Chris, you have something to add, or did you want to add anything to that?
No, you covered it. It's because the tenant has moved out and there isn't an existing lease with that tenant right now. They are not eligible to put in a claim, and you can't put one in for them.
Thanks, Chris. Do you want to take this next one? Does this apply to rent only? I think it's asking specifically, does the SHERA program only apply to rent?
Yes, it's only to rent, and rent that has not been paid, that was due between April 1st of 2020 to March 31st of 2021. So if it doesn't apply to utility, it doesn't apply to pet deposits or other extraneous fees or bills that they may have, they can apply to other programs for that, but not to the SHERA program.
Thank you. This next question is, where do we stand with vendors like PHA Network and PHA Web on reports to quickly gather this information and convert it to a spreadsheet for the portal?
Okay, so we have been working with PHA Web and PHA Network to get a report developed to help housing authorities that have those vendors. And the PHA Web is just about ready to release the report. We're getting a couple of answers to a couple questions for them. And PHA Net is working on their report, and it is anticipated that PHA Net will have a report ready by late May. What this report does is it allows you to pull from your tenant management systems the information that needs to go into the application for each person that is claiming that that has a claim, and you are going to submit the application on behalf of. There still will be columns that need data entry on the behalf of the housing authority, because it is information that is not captured in the tenant management system. But most of that information will come right off of that certification that we showed you earlier, if you don't have it somewhere else in your system. So it is being worked on. We have contacted MRI and have, but we have not heard back that they were able to do the report.
Thank you, Chris. I see a question. I think it was just answered in the chat. I'll go back and find it. This next one I'll take is, will the tenant be responsible to pay late charges for the month of, I'm sorry, will the tenant be responsible to pay the late charges? I think this is asking for the months where they didn't pay rent. Are they responsible to pay the late fees?
I have to go back and look at guidance that we sent, but I believe that we said that housing authorities, that the late charges were waived for this period of time, but I do need to go back and double check it.
That would only apply to state public housing anyway, since we
That's
can't give guidance on federal public housing.
Right, state
So
public housing only, yes.
It's a good question. We'll take that one back, kind of the legal about whether late fees count as back rent or not.
Yeah,
I think this one, it was answered in chat, but I think it's a good one to call out. So if a tenant has already received funds from RAP, but still has an outstanding balance, they're assuming that we can apply SHERA for the remaining balance. Is this correct?
Yeah, my answer, and somebody else can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm 99% sure this is right, which is why I typed it, is the answer is yes, as long as it is from the eligible period of, rent that was due between April 1st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, and not duplicative of what RAF paid for. So what you're saying is it's what's left over, so it's not duplicative. So yes is the answer.
Yep, Ben, I think that's correct. I think it was worth sharing with a larger group. I don't see any other open questions, but if you all have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat and we can have our panelists address them. Oh, here's one. Oh, let's assume,
Go
yes.
ahead. Go ahead, Adesha.
Let's assume an LHA has both elderly and family developments. Is it possible to upload the spreadsheet for the elderly development and get that going while we review potential extra pandemic unemployment assistance payments with family housing, and then upload another spreadsheet for the family program applicants?
so each development has to be submitted on a separate spreadsheet. So it's project specific or development specific. So you can start at any point with any development that you want to start with. So if you have a 6671 and you have a 200-1 and it's going to take you more time to reach out and get answers from the family development, and you've only got a few people in your elderly development, you can submit the 6671 application when it's complete. They don't all have to come in at the same time, but they do have to be done on separate application sheets.
Right, and I believe you can
put multiple developments on one application.
Right. I also think though you can submit more than one time for a property if you have additional claims. Is that correct, Claire?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have multiple chances. Also, I just want to answer one question I answered in chat, but I think it's important. The question is, in what circumstances would make an applicant ineligible or cause for being denied for SHERA? So basically, it's just for being outside the program eligibility, which is being over income, which is over 80% area median income, or have the arrearages requested not be from outside the eligible period of April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. And of course, you can only apply on behalf of a tenant if they have signed a tenant cert, giving you that permission and attesting that they have a COVID-19 related hardship. One note here, in order for to make sure that we're in compliance with federal guidelines, even though in the majority of cases, we're going to rely on the spreadsheet application, the claims and the amount claimed by tenants. For large claims, we are going to over $5,000. We are going to follow up and ask to see the tenant cert and the latest rent determination. So it's possible that in that additional investigation, which will not come up that often, we might find something was amiss, and that could perhaps lead to denial.
Thank you, Ben. I see a question. Can we repeat the questions in the chat? We will share this recording as well as the FAQs afterwards. If there's a specific question you want us to give more information on, I can raise that to the panel.
And Tisha, I think it was the answer that Chris, you're a little quiet. So I don't know if you could repeat the question from before about the property and the spreadsheet.
Okay. So the question was about whether or not if you had a 667 development and a chapter 200 development, or even if you had multiple developments in the same program, could you work on one and submit that, or do you have to submit everything at once? So each application that you submit, you have to submit an application for each individual property. So if you have a 6671 development and you know that you're going to be able to, you have people in arrears and you know that you'll get the certifications and the information quickly, or quicker than you're going to get from your family development, you can submit the application for your elderly development while you continue to work on your family development. And then when you get your family information, you can submit the application for that family development. So it is a separate application of multiple claimants that live in a particular property that must be submitted by the housing authority. If you submit and you find later, let's say you submit for your 6671 development and you find out later that somebody didn't come forward, or they now are bringing in their certification, after the 2-week period that you waited, you can, as long as they're eligible, you can submit another application with that claimant's information in that application.
Thank you, Chris. This next question is, if a housing authority has converted federal public housing developments through the RAD program, what phase of owner eligibility applies?
Sorry, it's a good question. We may have to address that in some of these edge cases for housing authorities, the FAQs. I understand if the housing authority is still basically manages the property and it hasn't been completely privatized to, maybe it's a nonprofit affiliate of the housing authority, but as long as it's not like a outside management company, like a Trinity or something, if the housing authority is owning and managing it, they should apply. If it's been completely outsourced, that management company should apply. Is that Aviva, Chris? Does that ring right to you? It's about whoever the owner manager is.
Yes, it does.
It would be eligible either way. It's just who does the application. This next question from David Holden is, what documentation will we talking a lot, tripping over my words. What documentation will be required if a balance is over $5,000? So I believe it's the tenant. We would like to see the actual tenant cert. I believe it's the rent roll justifying the claim and the most recent income determination. Is that correct?
And the lease.
And the lease. Well, the lease has the lease has them.
You may be asked for additional other than that documentation. You may be asked for other information. It really will depend on what the review shows, but those will be the pieces of information to start with.
Thank you. This next question is, will this apply to MRVP?
So again, it sort of depends on a few things. If it's a subsidized property, the landlord is in a subsidized property where either it's project-based MRVP or they've been built with public funds, then they'd apply through SHERA. If the MRVP voucher holder is just a random market apartment, but they're being funded with a voucher, this is also the same as for Section 8. They don't really have a subsidized landlord, and they would apply through RAFT as an individual. Because again, the SHERA is a property-based program.
Thank you. Did you want to take this next question? Should housing authorities notify landlords of AHVP, MRVP, and Section 8 of the availability of SHERA?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if we landed on that. I think there's no requirement to, but it may be a good idea. because again, if they are a subsidized landlord, they will also be hearing it from their portfolio managers in mass housing or MHP or elsewhere in DHCD.
This next question is regarding uploading the application. So my understanding is that a separate application for 667-01 versus 667-02 versus 200-01, et cetera, separate Excel files versus using multiple sheets in Excel.
That's correct. It's a separate Excel file.
Kathy, looks like your question got cut off. Oh, here we go. Can you please repeat whether MRVP, AHVP, and Section 8 can apply within SHERA?
So
Chris or Ben?
Ben,
Say that one more time, please.
the question is, whether AHVP, MRVP, and Section 8 can apply through SHERA, and the answer is if it's project-based and therefore place-based subsidy, and there's a property manager or owner for that project-based subsidy, yes. If it's just a Section 8 or MRVP in the private market, no, that individual tenant would have to go through the ERAP program.
Right. Yeah, because we're not trying to bring, yes, that's exactly right, Aviva. I'm sorry, I zoned out for a second there. Because it's a subsidized property-based program, we can't bring in the whole private market. That's why we draw those lines. It's not really about the tenant, it's about the property. That's the answer. Thank you. And that's the justification. Thanks, Aviva.
Perfect. So if the tenant has a balance before April 1st, 2020 and continues to have an outstanding balance, are they eligible?
They're not, well, they may have new balances from after April 1st, 2020 that are eligible, but the balance before April 1st, 2020 is not eligible. And that is from the federal, that's from the language directly in the federal bill authorizing this funding. It's nothing before April 1st is eligible.
If they have arrearages from before April 1st, they could apply individually for RAFT.
That's true, because RAFT is not governed by the same federal rules.
Right.
But
so they could apply to their RAA, Regional Administrating Agency, for RAFT, and assuming they meet the eligibility, could be eligible for arrears to be covered for anything before April 1st, 2020. And then SHERA can cover any arrearages after April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. So it's still worth applying for this tenant through SHERA.
Thanks, Aviva. Regarding income eligibility, are we using gross or net income?
gross. It's not, yeah, because it's not based off the state regs or whatever. It's just whether their household income, total household income meets that AMI.
Thank you. This next question is there a minimum amount per unit that can be requested for reimbursement?
No, it's whatever amount is, it's the amount that's owed. You can put in a claim for any amount.
Yeah, and you are allowed to put in for over 5,000. It just triggers further review.
Thank you. So concerning a RAD development under control of PHA, would the application be phase 1 or phase 2?
Let's take that one back. I believe phase 2 because the owner is the PHA, but we will take that one back and confirm.
All right. We don't have any open questions at the moment. Let's give it a couple of minutes to see if anyone else has a question that they would like covered. So is the $5,000 for the tenant, not the property?
Correct. It's each claim. It's for the tenant claim, 5,000. If there's a claim for a tenant that is $5,000 or more, it will trigger a review.
If there are no questions at this time, we can move forward to the next steps. And if anyone thinks of another question as we're going through the next steps, feel free to add them in the chat and we can get back to them. So Kaylee, if we can go to the next steps, McQueen.
Yes. So let's review some resources and next steps before wrapping up with additional questions. Additional training opportunities will be available in the upcoming weeks to support you and your teams participating in the SHERA program. Invitations will be shared in the coming weeks so you know when these trainings are and how to register. For additional resources, visit the SHERA website, review the SHERA policy, supporting documents, and letters. Important next steps include, after reviewing the materials above and the next slide, reach out for questions by submitting a support ticket on the SHERA portal. This slide notes important next steps for owners to take. First, read and get familiar with the SHERA program policies and the SHERA owner agreement. Next, review the SHERA application data. An application template will be included on the SHERA website and list important information that you will need to collect from your tenants. Note that you will not be able to register or submit your application at this time. You will receive additional communication when your property will be able to register and submit the application. Finally, send the SHERA and owner letter to tenants and the tenant certification. These documents can be used to inform your tenants about the program and to verify eligibility and start collecting tenant permission. Additionally, you can leverage the talking points for owners/managers when meeting with tenants and can share the SHERA tenant overview reference guide. We will now open the floor for additional questions. Thank you.
And
Just to,
oh,
I'll just add that lots of folks have asked in the Q&A about whether we'll be sharing this PowerPoint in this presentation. I just want to note the answer is yes, that you will be receiving a follow-up email. In it, we will provide a link to the SHERA portal where this PowerPoint and the recording of this presentation will be posted. And we'll also let you know when the LHA specific documents, like we have some specific documents for LHAs to use in terms of the letter to tenants and some of the tenant FAQs when those are posted on the SHERA portal. So watch your email for the follow-up and it will be really easy to follow the link and find everything you need.
and I believe we still actually have 15 minutes. This training is scheduled to end at 2:15. So if we do have anybody else with questions about the SHERA program, would be great if you can post them into the Q&A now, and we'll wait a few more minutes to see if anybody has additional questions that the panelists can answer for you.
So a question just came in. What are the anticipated deadlines for applications?
So I don't think at the moment we have, the hope is that the portal will be open for registration and application by the end of May, early June. But as we said, we're still working through the pilot to make sure that all of the technology and the systems work. So we're kind of hoping, we're waiting for that process to be completely done before we open it up to LHAs who are in phase 2. So the process will start the end of May, early June, but there isn't then a deadline by which you have to submit all your applications as of now. We will certainly continue to communicate with you if a deadline for submission of all applications comes to be.
I think, Aviva, the something that I would just add is that because we've done a pilot, we also have some great best practices that we've learned from other owners and LHAs that have been involved in that pilot. And all of that material we're also going to be posting to that portal site for you. So you can, have an even smoother experience as you are choosing to participate in the SHERA program. So, we know that this is a lot of work for everyone to get these applications ready, do the communications with tenants, but we're really trying to make this as easy as possible for folks. So a lot of that kind of best practices will also be available for you and your staff to support you.
And as an earlier slide noted, we'll have a follow-up training about application readiness. So doing exactly, sharing those best practices as Claire noted. So stay tuned. We're going to invite you to another session where we're going to do a deep dive on application readiness.
And to Claire's point on the pilot, by going phase 2 rather than phase 1, it's not like housing authorities are back of the line to get payments. Instead, you're going to get a more polished system and process to work with, we hope, which should be a benefit to housing authorities. So I guess just to close, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. I know this was very dense and there will be more information to come. And we are really hopeful that this program, while it will require work from housing authorities, will also allow them will save a lot of work for tenants as they only have to submit a tenant cert, and will by allowing housing authorities to rely on the information they already have about tenants, make the overall process much easier and quicker than is typical through RAFT or ERAP, which should ultimately benefit both tenants and housing authority budgets. And that's the goal. And we hope we can get the system and the process to where that works for housing authorities. So we really appreciate your participation. And more to come. Anything else, Chris, or anybody else to finish us off?
No, if there are no further questions, this is, we said, this is the start of training that will be forthcoming. If you have questions that you think of later, please email us and let us know. And we look forward to this being a successful program and getting the rent arrears paid.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We all get 10 minutes back. Look forward to talking to you more about this soon.